What is up, everybody? This is the Sharp Angles podcast, the Monday afternoon edition of the Sharp Angles podcast, which we do live. I was going to say every week at 4 p.m. Eastern. Unfortunately, we're not here last week. My cat decided to get sick and to cost me a lot of money at the vet, but she's fine, and that's all that matters. But we are back. We are back this week to talk about the waiver wire, to talk about injuries, and to talk about all of that stuff coming out of Week 6 of the NFL season. And if we're going to talk about injuries, we're definitely going to talk about that with Tucker Bagley, who is, I assume, not in the best mood with the playoffs, the MLB playoffs. Or are they as dead to you as they are to me now?
Yeah, I don't know if you noticed, my injury story came out a little later last week, and that was just because I was sad. Because I decided it was okay to be sad for a little bit on Wednesday night. I wasn't angry. I wasn't frustrated. I was just sad.
I actually messaged you last week, and that didn't connect in my brain. I was like, because we're trying to get the timing of it right, just some like behind the scenes stuff. We're trying to get the timing of it right and everything when we want to do it. And I was like, oh, maybe he thinks we should do it later. It didn't even connect in my brain.
I just sat at my desk at 8 o'clock Wednesday night and thought, I'm too sad to do this, and I went to bed.
Fair. I mean, it's fair. It'll be better when you just lower your expectations. That's the way forward, for sure. I mean, the playoffs are dead to me. I don't even know what's happening anymore. Bring on the NBA season. I'm excited about the NBA season. But we're going to talk about a few injuries. There are some interesting kind of developments that came out on Monday, not related to the action from Sunday. So I figured we'd mention those at the top. The first is we saw Dave Canales come out and say that Jonathan Brooks is going to open his practice window this week, the rookie running back out of Texas for the Panthers, opening that window. It was funny whenever he was drafted, he had a torn ACL in college. Whenever he was drafted, like there was talk about, oh, maybe he might be ready for training camp. That always seemed wild to me. And now here we are 6 weeks into the season. I just wonder, do you have any thoughts on, like, he's not playing this week, right? Like, this is going to be probably a protracted out thing.
Yeah, I mean, so when you open the practice window, it's 21 days. So they would have 3 weeks to do it. I feel like this week would be quick. I would be surprised if he were on the field this week for Carolina. It feels like next week is probably the goal. You give him a week of maybe limited participation. Maybe you give him a day off on Thursday or Friday to recover, see how the knee holds up, and then maybe you ramp up to by the end of next week you have full participation. And then we're off and running, and maybe he's playing in a limited capacity in week 8 as opposed to week 7. So I would say it's probably targeted more than likely for next week as opposed to this week. But at the very least, it's a positive sign that he's going to be back on the field sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I actually, y'all are gonna have to forgive me. I don't know the Panthers bye schedule off the top of my head, but the Panthers are on bye in week 11, so they're definitely not waiting that long. I was wondering if they were going to play some of those games. We wonder about like Christian McCaffrey and stuff like that with some of the games they're playing. I wonder if they're going to play games. No, you're probably right. Jonathan Brooks coming back. I think that, I was not excited about Jonathan Brooks in pre-draft season. I did expect that it was going to be about half the year. We actually saw those reports come out in August that they were not really expecting him until the second half of the season. And I don't know how big of a share of work we're going to see for him, because Chuba Hubbard, since Andy Dalton has taken over, has actually been pretty good. And so I'm interested in kind of how this all works out. Canales said that he will that his role will like develop naturally. I think that's what he said, something to that effect. And so, we'll see how long it takes for Brooks to become the full-time back. Brooks is very talented. Obviously, Brooks is someone you're very excited about in Dynasty, especially if the Panthers can figure out the quarterback situation moving forward. But from a redraft perspective, I'm not sure. He's available in like 40% of leagues. If you have an open roster spot, I'm not going to say that you shouldn't go and pick him up. But it just is an odd situation that I'm not so sure about. Another one that I'm waiting and seeing, and because I drafted him a lot this year, I'm very hopeful for, is it seems like Cooper Kupp might practice this week. So let's keep those finger crossed. Puka's not coming back this week, but maybe we get Cooper Kupp. So let's hope for the best. All right. Let's move on to talk about a lot of injuries. Before we do that, I do want to mention my waiver wire column is available on the site every single week for free. Go over there, check that out. We've been actually hitting pretty good as of late on the waiver column. We've been a week ahead on a couple guys in the last few weeks, and I've been really happy with that. Week ahead on Juju Smith-Schuster and Tank Bigsby and names like that. So I've been excited. So go and check that out. You can also go and check out Tucker's injury column on the site as well, sharpfootballanalysis.com. Also on the site, you can find our fantasy pack package and our betting packages. You can get both of those for 20% off using promo code ANGLES. Our betting package is, our props are just absolutely killing. We're doing great. Our betting package is doing very well from Warren Sharp. And then from a fantasy perspective, if you subscribe to our fantasy package, you will get Rich Rebar's worksheet columns every single week. He previews every single game, every single week, every single fantasy relevant player. They are the best way to get ready for the fantasy weekend. I read them every week. I would read them every week, even if I didn't need to read them every week to make sure they showed up on the site. And so I love those. They are really worth the price of admission. They are outstanding, the best fantasy content you can find from Rich Rebar. And remember, you can get all that 20% off using promo code ANGLES. So go and check that out. Also, if you're listening to us, thank you. We appreciate it. If you're listening to us in podcast form, we appreciate that. Subscribe, like, all that stuff. If you are watching this live, we appreciate that over on our YouTube channel. If you'd like to watch us live, you can do that over on the YouTube channel, Sharp Football Analysis. Again, subscribe. You'll get notified when we go live, all that fun stuff. All right, that's out of the way. Let's talk about Jordan Mason. I mean, when we went into Thursday night and, we've been thinking about, okay, Jordan Mason's been, if you were able to get him as like a waiver ad in late August, people were drafting him, but before that, maybe not. And you ended up with him as a waiver ad. Like Jordan Mason has been just the best waiver ad that we've had. It was such an odd situation because we didn't know. Like we went into week one thinking McCaffrey might play in that game. And then on Monday night, it all kind of fell apart. Now on Thursday night, Jordan Mason goes down with a shoulder injury, tries to come back, ends up leaving the game for good. This situation is so odd, and I don't know how much insight you have in this situation because, like, the fact that he came back is good news, but then coming out of it, it's been felt more like bad news, and I just don't know if we're going to see him this week.
Yeah, I mean, the positives are he was considered day-to-day from pretty much the onset after Thursday night's game. They have 10 days, right? Because they played on Thursday night. So he has a longer runway to get ready. But there also just haven't really been that many updates since Thursday night. And given, maybe just the history of 49ers running backs and their injuries this season and maybe what we've seen for the prognosis and where they kind of developed after that, I don't know. I'd like to still think that Jonathan Brooks is day-to-day. And when we get to Wednesday, he's on the practice field and he's good to go. Or not Jonathan Brooks, Jordan Mason. I saw Jonathan Brooks on our list there. No, Jordan Mason, I'd like to think that he's going to be on the field, but probably feels like best case scenario, he's limited in practice Wednesday and Thursday leading up to Sunday. I think if he doesn't practice early in the week, then there is some cause for concern.
With that kind of backup situation, it's interesting because, Mason came in and, that's obviously he's been amazing and that's all been great. But for the past few weeks, Rich Rebar and I on Thursday's show have mentioned, and I put him in the waiver column in our deep cut section, I think every week, that if you're talking about like high upside handcuffs, then Isaac Guerendo is on that list, especially since he's backing up a guy who, we still don't know a ton about, even though Jordan Mason's been exceptional. And we didn't know exactly how he's going to handle the massive workloads that he was getting. And so we've seen this happen now. And now obviously we are very interested in Guerendo. We'd be much more interested in Guerendo if we really had more clarity about Jordan Mason's situation. But either way, we are interested in Guerendo. What I will say is that in that second half, Patrick Taylor had 5 carries in that second half to 6 for Guerendo. And Guerendo ended up having the massive run, which we know that he can do. We know that he can create those big plays. And that's ultimately what gives him so much fantasy upside, which made him such an interesting kind of handcuff option. But I am a little bit worried about what this split looks like if Mason is out. And we don't even know that Mason's going to miss time. I brought up Christian McCaffrey. You actually wrote about Christian McCaffrey, I believe, last week. And kind of when we started to get good news about him, we don't know when he's coming back. I mean, it's not going to be this week, it seems like, but we also don't know when he's coming back. And so there's just a lot of uncertainty in the situation that makes it tough to really go all in on Guerendo like we might if Mason was going to miss a month or something like that. And so it's a difficult spot. It's a difficult situation. And I don't know if I'm going to be willing to bid enough to get Guerendo for what he's probably going to end up going for this week.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one big question mark because I think obviously if you're the 49ers, then Jordan Mason is healthy. He'll be back on the field and he becomes their starting back again. Obviously, plan B or plan C, depending on where you put McCaffrey in, it is splitting up between Taylor and Guerendo, kind of like we saw in the second half. As for McCaffrey and his future, I wrote again this morning, I have a feeling he's coming back after their bye week. They don't need to rush him back with how successful Jordan Mason's been, although their offense in in the red zone hasn't necessarily been that great, and you have to wonder if not having Christian McCaffrey in those situations is what is causing that struggle for them. But you kind of look ahead, and Kyle Shanahan's already said he's not going to play this week against the Chiefs. So then I think they have Dallas after that, then their bye week. I have a feeling he'll be back on the practice field following their bye week, and he'll be active in week 10 or week 11, whatever week that ends up being. I think that's week 11. So 3 more weeks without McCaffrey, and then I think he's back for the stretch run.
Yeah, I mean, if we got Guerendo for 2 games or whatever it ends up being, I mean, you'd be pretty excited about that in this offense.
Especially in that offense.
It is. It's one of those just odd question marks. Another interesting situation is with Travis Etienne, who I believe Doug Peterson came out. Doug Peterson's still the coach of the Jaguars. They're still in London, by the way. Travis Etienne Doug Peterson came out and said that Etienne is week to week. I'm going to let you interpret that and what week to week means, but I think I probably know what that means.
Yeah, I mean, it means he's definitely not playing this week, and more Tank Bigsby, right? Like I think it's week to week, and I think based on how successful he's been and how successful Bigsby's been in that offense, it might be maybe a little bit of a shift on workload and who gets the lion's share of the targets in that backfield if Bigsby can kind of play well the next couple of weeks while Etienne is healing up. I mean, a hamstring, especially for a running back, is probably a multi-week injury unless it's something really, really minor. It's kind of unfortunate. They're all stuck in London together. Maybe that's why Doug Peterson is still the head coach right now, because they don't want to send him to Heathrow and make him fly back to Jacksonville by himself. It's just kind of a marriage by convenience at this point. But yeah, I think for Jacksonville, first of all, I love Jacksonville in the spot. I love the fact that they get to play a second game in London. Like, they should win pretty handedly this week, just because they don't have to deal with any of that travel or anything from week to week. But as for Etienne goes, I think he's probably on the shelf for at least a couple weeks.
Yeah, I mean, Bigsby is the answer. Bigsby's been obviously someone we've been picking up for a couple weeks. I will say he is still available in a surprising number of leagues, but I would assume that those leagues are either dead or not particularly competitive. And so, I mean, it is worth checking, but he's probably not available. I will say there was, again, like we had with the San Francisco situation, there was a surprising split in this backfield with D'Ernest Johnson getting just 1 fewer carry than Bigsby and running 24 routes to just 5 for Tank Bigsby. And I do think that if we're in a negative game script, we're not going to get as much Tank Bigsby as we want. We're not going to end up getting kind of him in that kind of pass catching role and catching passes, which we hadn't seen a ton of already. And so that's a big concern. And also, by the way, makes D'Ernest Johnson, especially if you're in deeper leagues, makes somebody that you're certainly interested in adding. But to your point, this is their second week in London. The Patriots are coming over, for their first one. This is Drake May's second start in this situation. The Jaguars are 5.5-point favorites. You would expect them to have a better game script this week against the Patriots in that offense. Although, I mean, Drake May played pretty well. It wasn't, the cleanest game, but he at least had that offense moving. He at least had the passing game moving. We know how bad the Jaguars are as a pass defense, at least. We know how bad they are in that situation. We saw what the Bears were able to do. And so maybe this game script gets out of hand for the Jaguars again. And maybe we're going to see a lot more D'Ernest Johnson than maybe you would like to see if you're somebody that's hoping to start Tank Bigsby. But either way, I mean, Tank Bigsby is going to start. Tank Bigsby is the one that you want, with D'Ernest Johnson more in kind of that deep league appeal. Another injury we have here, unfortunate injury with Chris Olave picking up a concussion this week, and it seems unlikely that he's going to be able to play in week 7, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's just unfortunate timing for him, because I think he got hurt third play of the game, and they have a Thursday night game coming up against Denver, which makes it virtually impossible for him to get through concussion protocol. So yeah, if you're an owner of Chris Olave, if you're Chris Olave yourself, just get ready to go to Los Angeles in 2 weeks. Go play the Chargers. Kind of take this week off. No need to go to the Superdome and host Denver. Just hang out. Get ready for your trip to Los Angeles in 2 weeks and take it from there. But yeah, the Thursday night game is just an unfortunate scheduling quirk for Chris Olave. Just poor timing for a Saints team that's not lost 4 in a row.
Yeah, and I mean, we've seen it. I mean, we're still with Malik Neighbors here, where Malik Neighbors got that extra time, and so we were hopeful that he was not even going to miss any time, and now we're 2 games in. The thing with
Mike Rico did say last night he expects Malik Neighbors back against the Eagles on Sunday.
That's good news. The league is a better league whenever Malik Neighbors is playing, and so that's certainly good news. But what I'm saying is that we just don't know about concussions. But for sure, with him playing on Thursday night, I mean, you're not liking his opportunities there. There are some interesting options here. Obviously, Rashid Shaheed is rostered in pretty much everywhere. Bub Means did get 8 targets without Olave in that game. He has a good athletic profile. He's definitely somebody you want to pick up. I just wonder how excited we are about this passing game, about the Saints passing game. If we get another week of Spencer Rattler, which I believe we will, how excited are we against them, on a short week going up against the Denver pass defense? Denver pass defense probably going to be without Patrick Surtain because Patrick Surtain is in the same situation entering the concussion protocol. But even without Patrick Surtain, they're a good defense, a good pass defense. I don't know how excited we can get about anybody. I don't know how excited I can even get about Shaheed in this spot with the Saints offense and kind of the free fall that we're in now with the backup quarterback as well. But I mean, Bub Memes, he got 8 targets. He's definitely a pickup. He's definitely somebody you're looking to. But it is, it's just an unfortunate turn of events with the Saints offense that through 2 weeks we thought, because Rich Rebar was very high on this offense going into the season. I have a lot of Rashid Shaheed, not as much Olave, just kind of how drafts fell and how I intended to draft this year. I liked Olave, but I have a ton of Rashid Shaheed, and yeah, it just the wheels have fallen off, and I don't know when we're getting it back. Like, do you have any thoughts on like Derek Carr? Like, I know that I think they said like weeks, so it's a tough situation.
Yeah, I mean, just I don't know. It was an offense that peaked too early, but like you said, like we were expecting them to take a step forward, and it's obviously tough when you're down to your second or third string quarterback without Derek Carr. Yeah, like you said, when it first came out, it was a couple weeks. I think it was 3 to 4 weeks. They haven't put him on the IR, which means they expect him to be back relatively soon, within the next couple weeks. They didn't expect it to be a 4-week injury or a 4-week out time. But yeah, you look at the rest of their offense and just kind of what transpired yesterday with Spencer Rattler under center. The tight ends and running backs got a lot of I think half of his 40 targets went to Alvin Kamara and the tight ends and the other running backs. And you mentioned Rashid Shaheed, the number 1 wide receiver now with Chris Olave out. He got 7 targets, had 1 catch for 11 yards, but means I think he ended up with 5 catches for 45 yards, was the team's second leading receiver. So just because it's such a low floor now with Spencer Rattler under center, I'm not really sure if there's anybody worth picking up.
Yeah, and that's really the problem that we have here with Memes. Although I will say, I mean, they did make it a game in the first half, thanks in part to Shaheed. I think he had a punt return for a touchdown, if I'm remembering correctly. So if you got those points in fantasy, then Shaheed at least he gave you those. So congratulations on those points. I needed those in a few leagues, so I do appreciate it, Shaheed. Another wide receiver concussion, Marvin Harrison. This one, because the Cardinals play on Monday night, we at least have a shot, but again, we keep bringing up the cautionary tales, right? With the concussions and kind of what we're looking at.
Yeah, and if you watch the play, he got up and was really dazed and took a couple steps, and then he kind of fell back down to the turf. It didn't look good. Makes me think it's more than just kind of a minor bump on the head. So not only do I think, even with the Monday, it might be tough for him to get back. I just think based on, what we saw initially and kind of the only video evidence we have, but what we saw from him when he first got hit, I have a feeling it's going to be more than just a week.
And then the obvious ad here is Michael Wilson, who was an ad last week because going into this week, he had been over 20% target share for 3 straight games. One of those games without Trey McBride. Another one was with Trey McBride leaving early. But even with McBride back in week 5, he still went over that. He kind of disappointed a little bit with only 4 targets this week, although he did find the end zone, so he got there. If you were kind of using him in a desperation situation, he was a guy we talked about on Uncut Gems on Thursday. So, he was already an ad. He's definitely an ad now. It seems like we're probably going to be without Marvin Harrison. But what I will say is this passing game just hasn't been very good as of late over the last 3 games or so, 4 games or so. Since that Rams game, it really just hasn't been as good as we had hoped, as good as we were hoping with how highly I rate this offensive coaching staff. We really haven't seen it develop. I mean, they have Trey McBride, they have Marvin Harrison when he's healthy, they have Michael Wilson, who I do think is a pretty good secondary receiver. They have Greg Dortch. You would expect this passing game to be better, and we just haven't seen it. And I don't know if we're going to see it get a lot better here if we're without Marvin Harrison. And then they're playing the Chargers, and I mean, we know the Chargers are going to slow things down and limit volume a little bit. So again, I feel like I'm throwing cold water on everybody, but it is kind of one of those cold water weeks where it's like, all right, I'm excited about Michael Wilson. Like I said, I had Michael Wilson as an ad last week. I added him in some leagues last week, and we'll see what happens here. But I don't. Again, it's not like one of those. Okay, I'm going to go out and blow my entire fab budget on Michael Wilson.
Yeah, I mean, he even with Marvin Harrison out, he had 2 catches for 21 yards, only got 4 targets. And, that passing offense you mentioned, they've really struggled. And really the only guy who continues to put up numbers is Trey McBride. Even, the rest of that offense, James Conner, he got injured and hurt his ankle, ended up not really playing in the fourth quarter, though Jonathon Gannon said it was due to game script, not necessarily his injury. So, good if you're hoping for James Conner to be healthy, not good if you're hoping for James Conner to be a productive member of this offense moving forward. But yeah, I mean, just kind of across the board right now, unless it's Trey McBride, I don't really trust anybody for the Cardinals.
And Conner had been really good. I actually had Conner on the list. I want to talk about him because you're right. Like, we did see that, but he was getting his ankle taped in the second half. He fumbled and then didn't play again. And, we've heard that Joe Mixon quote from D'Amico Ryans after week 2. I'm like, yeah, he's probably going to be fine. It's like burned in my brain here. And I feel like we've had to learn our lesson with the coach speak. And like, I'm going to definitely have Trey Benson as an ad this week. Trey Benson and Emari Demercado, a feature of this exact episode of the podcast last year. They actually they split time in that second half. They had 4 carries apiece. Demercado ran a lot more routes, which you would expect. And you would think that Benson, even if Conner is missing time, Trey Benson is going to be pretty game script dependent because Demercado is there. But I would bet on Trey Benson as the lead back. The Chargers, with the offense and the way they run their offense, probably not running away from the Cardinals on Monday night. It's not a great matchup, but I don't think it's like really one you're scared of. So if we didn't get Conner, if we didn't get James Conner, and we'll see when we figure that out, I would be very interested in Trey Benson this week. I think he's talented. We saw him, have a pretty good run in the second half of this week's game. And so I would be interested in Benson. But like, to your point, the coaching staff seemed pretty like we're going to be okay and that Conner's going to play. I will say, though, we haven't got our month-long James Conner absence yet this year, and that comes every single year. At some point, the James Conner 4-game absence is coming, so we'll just have to see when that happens.
Yeah, and as this team, I mean, they're 2-4 right now. I don't know if they're necessarily gunning for a playoff spot. I mean, James Conner's 29 years old. As productive as he was, I think he had 20 touches and 100 yards each of the previous 2 weeks before he got injured this week. Like, he has been a productive member of this offense. He's averaging 4.5 yards per carry. Trey Benson's a rookie 3rd-round pick who's only 21 years old. Like, he has talent. The coaching staff obviously believes in him. They spent a day 2 pick on him, and so far he's only got 30 carries for 107 yards. So, I don't know. I think as the season kind of wears on, you might see a little bit more of a passing of the torch from Conner to Benson, just as this offense tries to look a little bit younger.
I don't know how much fantasy takeaway there is from this injury, but I it's definitely one we need to talk about, and that's Dallas Goedert with his hamstring injury. What's kind of the outlook, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Dallas Goedert never played a full season without getting injured, except for his rookie year. I think he's played 14 games last year, 12 the year before. Played 15, I think, in 2018 was the only year.
Many people say that Dallas Goedert is the James Conner of tight ends. Many people say that. I've heard several people say it.
That must be a Texas thing because they don't really say that much up here.
No one has ever said that. No. No one has ever said that.
But I just think for Dallas Goedert, like, same thing. It's a hamstring injury. It's probably a multi-week injury. I don't think it's an injury that will land him on the IR, but this is a guy who's dealt with injuries his entire career. He entered the week leading tight ends and receiving yards per game, and then he gets hurt on the 3rd play, and obviously that number drops. So I think it's going to be a couple-week absence. Grant Calcaterra was the Eagles' 2nd leading receiver, which is kind of mind-blowing when you have A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, but he outpaced Devontae Smith. He had 4 or 5 catches for 65 yards, so maybe they see something in him as kind of the lead pass-catching tight end moving forward with Goedert out. But I think that passing offense really revolves around Smith, Brown, and maybe Saquon Barkley, and who knows how many other touches there are for the rest of that supporting cast.
Yeah, he had 4 for 67. Grant Calcaterra. My question is, does it really matter? Because like you said, I mean, like it's it's AJ Brown and it's Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goedert struggled to be consistently fantasy viable in this offense because of how large a share of targets go to those two wide receivers. Both of those receivers are back and healthy. You mentioned Dallas Goedert leading tight ends in yards per game. That was because we didn't have Devontae Smith and for AJ Brown.
170 in the game that the two of them didn't play. I think it was probably the best tight end game by anybody this season, but that was it.
You're probably right. You're probably right. That is the tight end world that we currently reside in.
But no touchdowns this year for Dallas Goedert, so that kind of limits his fantasy upside as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we know what this is. We know what the situation is. And if it's not Dallas Goedert getting there, it's like a weekly tight end one. I'm not going to get too excited about Calcaterra. But again, if you're in deep leagues, you need a tight end. It is what it is. We did get some good news about Aaron Jones today coming out of the bye.
Yeah, it looks like he's gonna practice. He suffered a hip injury in their game 2 weeks ago, and that was a London game, right? I'm not making that up. That was a London game. So he suffered a hip injury. I think initially at the time they said he was day-to-day. But yeah, it looks like he's going to practice this week, and that's a good sign that he's going to be active on Sunday. I think he's already on the field this early in the week.
Yeah, I mean, if he's practicing this week and doesn't suffer a setback, yeah, you feel pretty good. Obviously, you're moving Ty Chandler down. Like I probably won't even have him as an ad this week, and Ty Chandler wasn't particularly effective when he got those carries after Aaron Jones left anyway. And so yeah, Chandler's still a stash if you need a handcuff, if you're in a deep league. He's still one of those guys that we feel pretty confident is going to get the bulk of the work if something were to happen to Aaron Jones. And Aaron Jones, we've seen him struggle with injury issues in the past several years. So, all of that is still true of Ty Chandler. But in the immediate future, I am guessing that Aaron Jones plays this week, barring a setback. And so that is obviously great news. We also got some positive news on Devon Achane. Looked like he practiced on Monday. That's today when we're recording, in a non-contact jersey. So, I mean, obviously that's not the full practice you want to see as he tries to come back from the concussion he suffered before the bye. But it feels like positive news.
Yeah, definitely. And, we knowing what we know about the concussion protocol, like him just being out on the field, I think is step 2 or even 3. So him being out there in a non-contact jersey, it's not great. Like obviously you want to see him fully ready to go, but it's a huge step forward that he's even on the field. And given that we have a full 6 days until they play again, I think he'll be all right. I think he'll be back on the field.
I did see there was an odd report, speaking of the Dolphins today, from Jeremy Fowler, who said something about like Tua Tagovailoa wasn't going to play in week 7, which, I mean, he wasn't eligible to play. Like he's not eligible to come back until week 8. So I don't know what that was about. But the other part of the report was that like he's still talking to people. It had seemed to me that Tua was like pretty set, like it was going to happen. He was going to be back in week 8. And I now have some concerns about that. And, part of the reason why I'm still feeling excited about Achane, feeling excited about Mostert, Tyreek Hill, obviously Jalen Waddle, and might even see those guys as, as buy low candidates as we're heading into this. Because I was pretty certain we were getting Tua back. All the reporting had been we're getting Tua back. And now that one report from Fowler, and I mean, we're gonna say, okay, the fact that we're asking if he could play in week 7 whenever there's no way that he could play in week 7, maybe that questions some of the validity of kind of what's going on there. But like, I don't know. I'm suddenly a little bit more worried about Tua and kind of what we're seeing moving forward. And also, I wouldn't be surprised if the Dolphins are going to take it really slowly with, this very scary situation for Tua Tagovailoa. So it's just did you see that quote? And is it just,
I did. And I saw, Mike McDaniel said today that they expect Tua to be back this year, was his quote. He doesn't expect him to retire. They expect him to be back this year. I read a report last week that said he was still meeting with independent neurologists, which, suggests to me that he's, still maybe not out of the woods, or maybe they're being proactive and he is feeling better. But like you said, like he's not eligible to even return to practice until next week. So maybe next week we'll get a better idea when he is officially eligible to open that practice window. And if he's back on the field, then that's great news. And hopefully all this extra testing and all the cautiousness that they used during this process will help keep him safe moving forward. But you mentioned like there's so many real life implications about this, about his quality of life after he plays, or even just, as he tries to work through it, that I don't know, you have to take this so much more delicate. You have to be delicate with a concussion anyway. But when we deal with somebody like Tua, who has the history of concussions that he's had in such a public forum over the last 4 or 5 years, yeah, I mean, the Dolphins are going to do everything they can to make sure that they're 100% certain he's okay before he's allowed back on the field.
Yeah, I'm hopeful. Ultimately, I mean, we just want Tua to be healthy. So that's all that matters. But it is interesting from a fantasy perspective. Another really weird situation. Last week, and we obviously didn't record last week, but last week we saw like Michael Pittman come out, and like all the reporting was that Michael Pittman was like, he was going on injured reserve. Like on Wednesday, we assumed that he was going on injured reserve. On Friday, he practiced. On Sunday, he played, and he ended up, catching a touchdown pass. And then he comes out, I believe on Monday, it comes out and says that the, IR is still on the table. This is going to be a week-to-week thing. And this is just such a odd situation. I've developed my own conspiracy theory based on no evidence whatsoever that Michael Pittman has decided that if Anthony Richardson's playing, that he's going to go on injured reserve. That's my working theory. It's not a good theory. Yeah, he probably loves Anthony Richardson. I love Anthony Richardson. It's such a funny thing that he says, I go through all of last week assuming Anthony Richardson's playing. I go through all of last week assuming Michael Pittman's not playing, is going to go on injured reserve. Then Richardson gets ruled out. Then Pittman's suddenly going to be fine, and he plays with Joe Flacco. And it's a very weird situation. I don't know what's going on with this whole thing.
Yeah, Michael Pittman said after the game that he had a conversation with his dad, and his dad told him that if you're healthy or if you can walk out there, you play. So that's why he played, and he obviously scored the game when he touchdown.
Interesting, yeah.
For the Colts. So if your back hurts, like, go have a pep talk with your dad. Plain and simple. Like, more NFL teams, I think, need more dads in their locker rooms or in their training rooms to get these guys back on the field, because clearly it worked. It worked for Michael Pittman. But Anthony Richardson was another, just kind of the flip side of that, where it seemed like he was trending towards playing all week, and then he ended up sitting out. So maybe he does come back this week, and maybe if your theory is correct, then Michael Pittman goes on the IR. But as long as Michael Pittman's dad is there to give him pep talks on Saturdays before the game, I think he'll be out there.
I want to be very clear that I'm joking about just the weird situation. I like Anthony Richardson. I'm sure Michael Pittman likes Anthony Richardson too. I'm just joking. I want that to be very clear. Also, when we're talking about dads, we did have Christian Watson's dad getting into an argument with the Twitter doctor last week. So yeah, it's been a big week for dads and injuries in the NFL.
Jalen Brunson's dad got in a fight with Dante DiVincenzo. Patrick Ewing.
So that one. I don't know how many people listening to this podcast follow the NBA very closely, but he was definitely yelling at Tibbs. He said Tibbs' name when he was yelling, and the fact that Jalen Brunson's dad, Rick Brunson, right, came up to him after the game, it's just, I don't know. Are we going to have like a celebrity fight club, an NBA fight club, where they settle all of this Nova drama out? I'll wait for that. I'll be happy.
I mean, Rick Brunson, Temple
to watch
legend,
that for sure. I'm so happy the NBA is back. I'm happy the NBA is back because I love the NBA, right? I do love the NBA. I love watching basketball, but there is no better drama than NBA Twitter, and I love NBA Twitter with all of my soul, and so I'm so happy. I'm so happy that we're back. A couple other kind of injury situations. I mean, I think we probably should hit on Dontayvion Wicks and Jayden Reed. Jayden Reed played through his ankle injuries, probably fine, probably won't miss time, but you have to bring up injuries like that when they happen in game, because you never know what happens after the adrenaline wears off. So we'll at least pay attention to Jayden Reed. Seems like Dontayvion Wicks, though, is probably going to miss some time, right?
Yeah, Dontayvion Wicks has a shoulder injury. He's already been classified as week to week by Matt LaFleur. So it sounds like he's going to miss a little bit of time, might be a candidate for the IR. But Jayden Reed, I would expect to be back out there again this week. He seemed to play through it all right. Probably something that might limit him in practice. Maybe he doesn't practice on Wednesday, but I would expect him to be out there again this week.
And the receiver room looked like we expected, with everybody back, with Christian Watson returning again, his dad was right. Christian Watson returning kind of miraculously fast from an ankle injury that thankfully wasn't as serious as it looked. Jayden Reed didn't run as many routes. Obviously, he did have the injury issue, but he didn't run as many routes kind of in general as Romeo Doubs and Christian Watson. Romeo Doubs was back, ran the most routes, happened to connect on 2 touchdowns, which, as I've said these exact words before on this podcast, 2 touchdowns is well within the realm of Romeo Doubs' weekly production because he's out there and running a lot of routes in a good passing game, and that's that can happen from time to time. Christian Watson had the big touchdown. Good luck every week. This is going to be annoying every week, I think, outside of Jayden Reed, who we've already taken the L on as a podcast. I don't know if producer Matt has the we were wrong about Christian Watson. I mean, about Jayden Reed graphic. He can flash up there. There we go. We were wrong about Jayden Reed. Flashing it up there every time we talk about Jayden Reed. So outside of Jayden Reed, it might be like a weekly thing trying to figure it out. But we'll see. Thanks, Matt. And then one more here, Jerome Ford left with an injury. But at this point, I mean, we're hoping Nick Chubb's back, right? We don't care about Ford, Strong, Foreman. We're hoping we get Nick Chubb this week, right?
Yeah, I mean, if we want to bring this all full circle, which is fantastic storytelling by us, we started with Jonathan Brooks and his practice window starting this week, and maybe he'll be back next week. Nick Chubb, his practice window was open last week. He's expected to play this week. I think it was announced yesterday that they expect him to be on the field for week 7. Probably not in a full-time role, probably, going to be sharing some touches as he works his way back. But yeah, Nick Chubb will probably be back this week on the field for the Browns.
And I mean, I have to say, so you're not getting him back to the kind of offense that you want, because apparently we're just going to keep starting Deshaun Watson, no matter how bad, no matter how literally historically bad that he has been. Go and follow Austin Gale on Twitter and read some of his stuff about Watson. He's been historically bad. We're going to keep playing him. The Browns' offensive line is not helping their 29th in ESPN's run block win rate. But what I will say is that a good running back makes the offensive line look a lot better. You can just look to last year, and obviously, Chubb had only, I think, 28 carries last year, so it's a very limited sample, and there were some other situations going on. But if you just go back and look at last year, all Browns back as a whole, so all Browns running back as a whole, averaged 1.1 yards before contact per carry. Nick Chubb averaged nearly 2.1, nearly a yard better before contact before carry. Yards before carry. Yards before contact per carry. I got it out. There we go. Almost a full yard more. And that's because Nick Chubb is very good. And Nick Chubb is one of the best running backs that we've seen. We'll see how healthy he is. But him just coming back, and if he's healthy, he's going to be so much better than what we've seen out of these other running backs that I'm still excited about Chubb. I'm still excited. I have him in a few dynasty leagues. I'm really excited to get him back. So I'm hopeful for the best. But to your point, I do imagine we're going to see some limited workloads moving forward, even if it's not, Jerome Ford's not there and he's out and injured. We'll get some Pierre Strong. We'll get some Dante Foreman. We're not going to get the 20 carries out of Nick Chubb, at least kind of right out of the gate, right?
Yeah, it's going to be more of a running back by committee for at least a couple weeks as Nick Chubb kind of gets healthy again. Because same thing as we kind of look at this season for the Browns, they're 1-5, and maybe you don't necessarily want to burn the tread on Nick Chubb's tires on a team that isn't necessarily, destined for postseason football or meaningful football come Thanksgiving.
Did you see Kevin Stefanski's kind of video interview today where he's talking about Watson giving them the best chance to win? It felt, I won't lie to you, it felt a little bit like a hostage video. That there was somebody on the other side of the camera. I mean, maybe he does. Maybe Jameis Winston's not. How you can keep rolling this out there.
Would Jameis Winston be more fun? Like, just from an entertainment standpoint, like,
he would 100%.
I would root for Jameis Winston. I think a lot of people want Jameis Winston to do well. Even a 30-30 season again, like literally anything.
If we could get whatever the prorated equivalent of a 30-30 season out of Jameis Winston is, that would be so much better than the Browns team that we're currently watching and the Browns offense that we're currently watching. And Browns fans, I assume, would agree with me. Even if you have 15 interceptions from Jameis Winston the rest of the year, if he ends up throwing like 17 touchdown passes, that they'd probably take it at this point, because it's just, it's so bad. I'm sorry, Browns fans. I feel for you and kind of what we've watched here. A couple other ads, that aren't injury related to talk about, or like at least I guess they are kind of quasi-injury related. The first is Sean Tucker, who obviously, we were expecting another Tucker. We were expecting Bucky Irving to come out and have a really big game with Rachaad White out. And Bucky Irving did have a great game. He ended up, scoring a touchdown. But we saw Sean Tucker have a really great game out of that. And coming out of that, Todd Bowles said that Tucker has proven he's worthy of creating this kind of three-headed monster in this backfield, which is obviously not what fantasy players want to hear. But what I will say is Todd Bowles, whenever he said that Bucky Irving had earned more work, he was not lying about that. Bucky Irving came out and did that. And so I feel like we have to take Bowles at his word. I don't know when we're going to see Rachaad White again. I mean, that limited practice Wednesday and then DNP, that's you could speak more to that. That's not a great sign, right?
It's not a good
what
sign.
We saw from him last week.
Yeah, no, that's never good when you're trending backwards that way. But you mentioned add Sean Tucker into the mix there, and you're taking away from two guys who we were really just counting on, being successful. Rachaad White in particular, they're just being successful from a volume standpoint. So you add a third running back into the mix, it kind of dilutes everybody's value.
And you're really worried about it from a White's perspective because we could see Tucker really take those passing down role. Because that was always the thing about Irving and White is we thought that if White is there and healthy, that White's going to be the passing down back. And if he's the passing down back, that retains some of his value, right? Especially if we're going to get into kind of track meets. And what I will say also about Tucker, and I think this is important, is that in the first three quarters, Bucky Irving had 8 carries to 4 for Sean Tucker. Irving had 36 snaps to 16 for Tucker. He actually ran 24 routes to 11 for Tucker, despite Tucker getting 3 targets, just 1 for Irving. So it was still Bucky Irving's backfield, even though we didn't see the number of carries that we wanted. The first half of that game was really odd. Even though we didn't see the number of carries that we wanted, it was still Bucky Irving's backfield. I would suspect if Rachaad White is out on Monday night against the Ravens, if I have my schedule memorized correctly, Monday night against the Ravens, that's correct. I would still think we're going to see a lot more Bucky Irving. That's not a great matchup, though. And so, how excited you're getting. But yeah, if Rachaad White is back, then this just becomes a mess. So not sure what to do. Add Sean Tucker. I'm not going to say anybody shouldn't add a guy coming off that kind of performance, especially since he's a guy, if you're in the deep dynasty circles that we've been excited about for a while. I actually just cut him off of a dynasty roster 2 weeks ago, and that makes me unimaginably sad that is what happened. But here we are. He's definitely an ad. I would say the same thing about Antonio Gibson. We saw all DNPs for Ramondre Stevenson last week. Now they're traveling to London. I think we're probably getting Gibson again. Gibson at 83% of the carries in running back carries in the first 3 quarters. So you like that. It's not a great matchup against the Jaguars run defense, because the run defense actually hasn't been that bad, even though they got touched up a little bit by DeAndre Swift in London. But he can create as a receiver. We know how bad that Jaguars roster is from that perspective. And as we kind of mentioned, I think earlier with Drake Maye had, there were some spots where you go, okay, this is a rookie quarterback. This is what we expect from Drake Maye. But at least that Patriots offense was it moved, right? And at least we saw that. And one of the things we talked about last Thursday, Rich and I, is we're hopeful that we get an offense that we can at least be excited about some of the pieces. And I think we might get that out of Maye, especially in this matchup against the Jaguars. Maybe we get that out of Hunter Henry. Maybe we get that out of Demario Douglas. We'll see if Jalen Polk can kind of develop, a little bit. And so we're at least excited a little bit. So Gibson, obviously a name to know as well. And then deep leagues, if you need a quarterback, Drake Maye. So, all of that's out there on the wire for you if you're really desperate and looking.
Yeah. All makes sense. I mean, Patriots stopped 150 passing yards for the first time all year. Did they turn the ball over 4 times? Yeah, but at least they're moving it. In both directions.
The Jameis Winston experience is what we got from New England. What we want, what we would want to see with the Jameis Winston Browns where we got in New England. I will say, I mean, if you're comparing that start to Drake Maye to what we saw from the other rookie first starts this year, that compares favorably to those first starts from Caleb Williams and Jayden Daniels. So we'll see what happens. But that's it for us. I have to go and write the waiver column. Tucker's got to go and read more about injuries. We definitely appreciate you listening to us. Remember, head over to sharpfootballanalysis.com. Tucker's already written a little bit about the biggest injuries of the week, and then on Wednesday night he'll update with injury analysis for all 32 teams. So check that out on the website. My waiver column will be up on Tuesday morning, talking about all the most important ads for the week. Check that out. Remember, you can use promo code ANGLES to get 20% off any of our packages, our fantasy package, our betting package, whatever you want, 20% off. Like and review the podcast if you're listening to us there. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're listening to us there. And we will be back to talk with you next week.